What's up everyone? Welcome back to the series. Now this is going to be the last video in the series where we're going to deploy our application so that we make it available to whatever client application that may want to use it. We've built a very simple book review service that has helped us to learn the various concepts that are involved when building an application with FastAPI. We are now going to go ahead and deploy the various parts or components of this application, and that includes the web service itself, which is the FastAPI application. With it comes the PostgreSQL database and the Celery workers. We're going to be doing that on render.com, which is a platform as a service tool that allows us to easily deploy our application without having to worry so much about the configuration of our infrastructure. If you want to see more videos where I get to talk about deployment, kindly subscribe. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So if you haven't yet created an account with render.com, they have a free plan, and we're going to be exploring both free tier and other paid instances. For example, if we go to our services here, we see that we have static sites, web services, private services, background workers. Now, for some reason, or actually the background workers feature is one that requires us to pay. So I'm also going to show you how to set that up. We have Redis, PostgreSQL, CRUD jobs, and so on. So our application basically consists of the following. We have our web service, and that web service is our FastAPI API. We have a PostgreSQL database in which we are persisting our data. We also have Redis that is acting as our broker or our task queue. We also have the background workers, and that is going to be our Celery workers that are going to look into the task queue for each task that are going to be executed. So to start, we're going to first of all set up our web service. So I'm going to say new web service. And once I've clicked on a new web service, now you need to make sure you've already configured GitHub or GitLab or whatever Git provider you're using. And for my case, I've already set up my GitHub. And I have to point to the repository I'm using, and this is the repository for the project, which is FastAPI Beyond CRUD. So please go ahead and leave a star on this repository. Thank you. So when you go back right here, all we do is to first of all select the code and connect the code to the web service we're trying to create. We can choose a unique name for our web service, and that's also going to be the name of the URL on which our web service is going to be exposed. So I'm going to name this Bookly, and I'm going to name it Bookly API. So once I'm done with that, I have to specify the language. For our case, it's Python 3. Now, let me make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see. We then go ahead and specify the branch that we want to deploy. For my case, the only branch I have is main, which has the latest code. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it to main, and then the region for which the service will run. For my case, I don't have to edit that. And then the root directory. Now, if we go back within our code, we shall notice that all our code is residing within our source folder, but then we can still run our FastAPI command outside the source folder, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come right here, and all I'll do is to first of all create the start command. So I'll just write the start command here, and that's going to be our FastAPI. Now in production, when running our server, we're going to run it with FastAPI CLI, and we're going to be using the run command. So just like we did for our development and run FastAPI dev, for our case in production, we're actually going to be using our FastAPI run command. So the FastAPI run command is one that's going to run our server, but it's going to go ahead and run our server in a way that it will run it with debugging off, and then it will also allow us to stop all sorts of reloading. So if we go ahead and run our app the same way we did, can run it with FastAPI. So I guess I have to make this a little bit smaller. So if I come and say FastAPI run, and then I point to source, this is then going to go ahead and run our app. And for now, we can see that we are running our app, and it's being exposed on port 000 and then 8000, and then you can access our docs just like you see right here. So if we want to run it in development, we shall run it just like the way we've been doing for the previous videos, which is by running with FastAPI dev. So now that we've been able to do that, I'm going to simply come here and say FastAPI, and for our case we shall say run, and then we shall point to our source folder just like you see right here. Now another thing we're going to do is to simply point to the instance type. Now I'm not willing to pay for all these plans, but what I'm going to do is to pay for the free tier since this is a demo video. And once I've been able to do that, now I have the task of adding our environment variables. Now, if you've noticed, there's another thing I've skipped, which is configuring the build command. So the build command is one that's going to set up our requirements or the dependencies for our project. So you need to make sure that all dependencies exist within your requirements, so txt. Now, once that is done, I'm simply going to come right here and I'm going to import our .env. So I'll come right here, and then what I'll do is to copy what we have in our .env, and then I'll paste it. So I can simply say add environment variables, or I can go ahead and add them right here. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'll change the domain, and I'm going to leave this blank for now, but anyway, let me just leave it to localhost 8000, and then I'll edit it once we are done deploying. So I'm going to copy these values and then say add variables, so it will automatically generate them here. Once that is done, now I'm going to go ahead and say deploy web service. So you need to make sure that your requirements.txt has all requirements. You need to make sure that your environment variables are set correctly, and you need to also make sure that your code is up to date. So once that is done, I'm going to click on deploy web service, and then this will go ahead and deploy the web service. So we're going to be presented with a log. So I'm actually saying no logs to show, but then it's supposed to show the logs to show us the progress of the deployment. So now our application is live, and when you go back here, we shall now see this error that is telling us that we have an invalid host header. Now remember, in the middleware video, we went ahead and set up the trusted host middleware. So basically what we need to do is to go ahead and add this URL for our application inside our trusted host middleware. So when we go to our middleware, we shall look into where we registered our trusted hosts, and inside this list of allowed hosts, then we need to go ahead and add our domain for the specific application we are running on the server or on the render.com. So I'll go ahead and add this domain, which is the one that we've been provided by render. And once this is done, I'll go ahead and save, and then I have to commit this. So I'm going to pull up my terminal, and then what I'm going to do is to simply add this, and then I commit. And once I've been able to do that, I'll push these changes to the main branch. So once that is done, our application has to reload again. So each time we deploy on the main branch, it's going to automatically deploy those changes on our server, just like you see right here. So if we go to our deploy, we shall be able to see what is being run on the server side, or the logs for building our application. And now we see that our application has been deployed. So when you go back to our application right here and reload, we shall now see that our service is running, and I'm really not sure why this is not running, but let's actually see. If I reload, we see that we still have this invalid host header. So I'm going to go ahead and see. We added the invalid host, so I made a mistake. I just needed to add this comma right here. So I hope you do not land into that. And then I'll repeat the commit. And once I'm done with that, should be able to go ahead and redeploy the application. And after some time, we shall have our API live. So now that our application is live, let's go ahead and reload. And now we can see that our application is working successfully, but it's not yet connected to our database. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and visit the docs to see if they are working. So if we go to /docs, let me actually go to /redoc. And now we shall see that our redoc docs are going to load, and then you can see the API documentation. So just like you can see right here, we have our redoc documentation, and our API or web service is now up. So the next thing we're going to do is to set up our PostgreSQL database. To do that, I'm going to head over to Bookly or to render.com, and then I'll head over to our dashboard. And right now we can see that we have one service that's already deployed, and that's our web service. I'm going to click new, and then I'll click on PostgreSQL, and then I'll get a new PostgreSQL. So I'm going to set for this a book. I'm just going to provide for it a book. So I'll basically just provide for it the Bookly DB name. So that's going to be the name of our PostgreSQL database. And then I'll give it, so this is the name of the PostgreSQL instance, and then I'll give it the DB, the name. So this is going to be Bookly, and then I'll provide this with maybe Bookly underscore DB. So I'm going to provide that. And once that is done, then I'm going to provide a user. So I'll just basically call this the Bookly user. And then after that, I'll still keep the instance to be on that specific region. Then I'll specify the PostgreSQL version, but I'm going to keep it to the version that's provided here. And then I do not have any metrics, so I'll leave this blank. And then I'll choose the free PostgreSQL instance. And then I'll click on create database. So this is going to go ahead and create our database and then provide for us the different credentials we shall be using. Now that our database is available, we are being told that the database will expire on September 4th. So we need to go ahead and pay for it if we want to make it stay online for a little longer. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and get our credentials. So we have the host name, the database, all these other credentials. What I will do is to go ahead and simply open this. So this is what we're going to be using, and then it's what I'm going to replace here. And once I have that, we shall have access to our database. So if we go ahead and save and open up my terminal right here, what I want to do is to access this PostgreSQL database within our virtual environment so that I can create the database tables with Alembic. So to do that, I'm first of all going to see if the environment variable is being read. Now I can be able to access my environment variables via my terminal. So I can go ahead and do something like echo and then database URL. So this is going to point to the local database URL. So if I want to go ahead and rerun it with the updated environment variables, I'll have to restart my terminal. And then with that, if I echo, then I have this PostgreSQL over render.com. So once that is done, next thing is going to be for me to connect to that database. And the way I can be able to do that is by simply running PSQL. So this is the PostgreSQL shell utility that comes with PostgreSQL. So I have it already installed on my local host. And then I'll point to my database URL. So I'll say database underscore URL. And this is going to take us to our remote PostgreSQL, which is the Bookly DB we've created. So for now, if we try to list all relations, we currently do not have any relations. So we've been using Alembic as a tool to help us make these migrations reflect in our database. So to do that, I'll just come and open up a new terminal. And inside this new terminal, I'm going to run the Alembic command for creating our migrations in the database. So I'll do that with Alembic. And in this case, I'll call the upgrade command. And then we're going to point to head. And this will go ahead and update our PostgreSQL with the latest changes. But we now see that we have an error. And this error is telling us that the loaded cycle PG2 is not async. So for some reason, we cannot be able to connect to our database with the URL we have here. So remember how we did it for the first time? We went ahead and added our async PG. So we need to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come and say PostgreSQL plus, and for my case, I'm going to specify the database driver, which is async PG. And once we are done with that, I'll pull up my terminal and then we try to connect to the database again. So for our case, I'm going to go ahead and run the Alembic command. And still, we have that same issue. So we have to reload our terminals. So what I'm going to do is to kill these terminals and then I'll go ahead and run them again. So that is one annoying thing. So for now, we see PSQL error, connection to the server that failed. that does not exist. So let's actually see. I need to go ahead and try to echo the database URL. So if I echo database URL, now we basically expect this to be updated by the terminal. So if we echo database URL, we shall now see that our PostgreSQL plus async PG is set up. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and run Alembic upgrade and then head. So for our case, we shall just come and specify head, and this should be enough for our database tables to be created based off the migrations that we have. And now we see that running upgrade, and that's going to run all the migrations that we currently have in our code. What happened was I went ahead and got the external database URL from render right here, and then once I pasted it in with PSQL, it was able to open my shell, so I can access the PostgreSQL. So now I can go ahead and see if our relations have been created by running /DT, and then this will go ahead and list the books or the various database tables that we've created. So you can even see their structure. If I went ahead and did something like, let's say, describe on our book schema or our books database table, we shall be able to see the structure of our database table for books. We can do the same thing for our tags. So if we went ahead and let's say users, we can now see that our database tables have been created. So when it describes users, it will just return the entire schema or the entire structure of our database table for our users. So for now, our database tables have been created, and all we need to do is to go ahead and update our database environment variable on the render side. So if we go ahead and simply copy it, I'll go ahead and go back to our web service, which is our Bookly API. I've actually made a mistake, but we now see that our database is deployed, which is Bookly DB, and then we also have our Bookly API. So when I go to our Bookly API, I'll head over to environment, and what I'll do is to go ahead and delete what we have as our database URL, because I want to replace it with our current database URL. So for my case, I'll say add environment variable, and then I'll say add from env, or I'll actually go ahead and delete it, and then I'll say add from env, and then I'll paste in what is our database URL right now. So I'll click on add environment variable, and this is going to go ahead and update that specific variable. So once that is done, a deploy is going to be started so that we have our changes. When you go back to our logs right here, going to see that our requirements are going to be installed. So it seems like we still have an error. I wonder why that error is happening, because we already have that database URL environment variable set. So let's actually see that field required and is missing, and that's our database URL. So I'll go back to our environment and then I check. So it seemed like the database environment variable wasn't checked. I'll just go ahead and add it again, and then I'll say add environment variables. So that should go ahead and add it. Then our server will still deploy again to update that specific environment variable. So it seems like the environment variable wasn't added, so I'll just go ahead and manually add it. So just come right here, and I provide the database URL, and then I'll edit it with the PostgreSQL URL. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it, and then I paste it right here. And once I've done, I forgot to save changes, so that's what exactly I needed to do. So once the changes have been saved, our deployment is supposed to be started so that those changes are reflected on our server. All right, so now our application is live with our database already set up. So with that done, let's go ahead and try to test our endpoint. So we can now go to our redoc URL, and then what we can do is to go to the /doc so that we access our Swagger. And when you access our Swagger right here, we can try to get our books. So if we try it out, this is a protected endpoint, and therefore we should be requested to provide our authorization header. Let us try to create a user account. So even with the user account created, still we have a problem because we have not yet set up our Redis. So we need to go ahead and set that up, and also the background worker to send the verification emails. So to do that, we are going to go ahead and go back to our dashboard, and we're going to create a new Redis instance. So I'm doing this all on the free plans, which means you need to upgrade in order for you to go ahead and have these better plans. So I'll call this the Bookly Redis. And once that is done, I'll select the default region. I'll leave this, but one thing that we need is the ability for our Redis instance to keep our tasks the moment we are to push them. So in case our background workers are down, what needs to be done is Redis saving those tasks that we have pushed to the queue. So we need that specific functionality. So for us to set that up inside our Redis, what we're going to do is to basically check the neo eviction. So that's recommended for queues and persistence. And once we've been able to click that, then we're going to choose the free plan. I'll create a Redis instance. And then all I'll need is a URL to the Redis, and then I'll have to update this in the server's environment variables. So that means each time we are to make a task on our FastAPI site, like sending of emails, it will be stored in our task queue, and then when our background process or our background task is live, it will be able to look into the queue, get the task, and then execute it. So basically that's the whole point of setting neo eviction. Now that our Redis URL is available, what we're going to do is to copy its URL and then update this URL on our web server. So we're going to head over back to our web service, and inside our web service, we are going to go ahead and update the Redis URL so that we reflect the URL of the Redis instance we've created. So for our case, we are no longer using the Redis host and the port. I'm going to just head over to our settings here, and I'll delete these because these are already updated. Now, one thing I did is also leave and.env.example, as it will guide you with the different environment variable settings. So if you go back here, I'll add an environment variable, which is going to be our Redis URL. And once I've set that up, I'm simply going to go ahead and add the Redis instance. So I'll save. When you go back to our events right here, our server is going to be redeployed with the updated environment variable for our Redis. So for now, our deploy is done, and we can now go ahead and set up the background worker or the Celery workers. So even now, if we go ahead and create our user accounts, what shall be done is our task will be sent to Redis, and then with Redis available, when we start our worker, the worker will be able to execute any task that will be present within our queue. So if you want, we can go ahead and also create a user account or perform any task that involves us sending an email. So for example, if I went here and try to send an email, so this does not require us to log in. All I can do is to provide my email address, just like I am doing right here. And when I send, shall get a response telling us that the email has been sent successfully, but we of course know that there is no Celery worker that's active to help us send that email. So we need to set up one. So to set up a Celery worker, all we need to do is to go to our Bookly API right here, and we're going to go to new, and then you shall create a background worker. So this background worker is going to be a process that's independent of our web server, and all it's going to do is to connect to our Redis. when it's connected to Redis, it will go ahead and look for any task that shall be present within Redis and then execute it. So the code for running our server is going to still be located in the same GitHub repository. I'll pull that up and then I connect. So this is actually a paid service, and therefore I'm going to spend some of my dollars so that I can pay for this. But if you want to make me make this pack, please leave a like on this video. That's the cheapest way, or become a member of the channel. So I'll call this bookly-celery and then -worker. And once that is done, we shall use Python 3. We shall keep our branch to main, and we are going to also still remain within our root directory. And then our start command is going to be our Celery command. So now see that I have to pay $7 for this, so I'll keep it to that. But then I'll have to specify the command. So if we go back to our application on localhost, we shall now get out of our database terminal or database shell, and then I'll try to start our Celery worker. So the same command we have used here is the same command we're going to use for our Celery worker. I'll just come right here and say Celery, and for our case I'll specify the app. So our app is going to be found, so the app is going to be the Celery tasks app, or the C app instance, which is our Celery instance. So that's going to be found within source dot, and for our case this file is called Celery tasks, so that's exactly what I'm going to point at. And once I've pointed to that, then I'll have to access the specific app instance, which is going to be the C app. So I'll say .c_app. And once I've been able to do that, now I need to specify what I'm going to run. So for our case, that's going to be our worker. And then we shall also give in a log level. Now for the previous video, I talked about background processing, but I didn't really talk about logging. So if you want logging, we have to specify a log level. And that is done by just simply providing log level, and then we specify it to be info. So that's what we shall use for our log level. If I run this command, of course, it's going to go ahead and run our Celery server, just like you see right here. So what I'm going to do is to use the same Celery command to run our Celery worker on our web server. So I'm going to copy this. And once I've copied it, it's the exact command that I'll put here. So this is basically the command for running our Celery. It will go inside our source folder. We still have the same source code as the web server. And then it will look for our app instance, which is C app, run a worker, and then give it the log level. So I'll select this to be our starter instance. So if we have any environment variables we want to set, we can go ahead and set them up here. But one thing I can point to is the Celery app instance, or the Celery broker URL, because we specified it inside our Celery config. So when you go to our config right here, all we did was to just set up our broker URL to be the Redis URL. We also set up our result backend to be our Redis URL. So if I go ahead and provide those, I'll have to provide still the Redis URL and the other environment variables. So I guess I have to copy the environment variable that we have here with all these values, except that this time we are going to go ahead and set up these environment variables. So I'll say add from .env. I'll paste this inside here, but then we're going to change some things in here. So the first thing we shall have to change is going to be the Redis URL. So I'll have to add it right here by saying Redis _URL. And so I guess I have to remove this. So here we shall have our Redis URL, and that's going to be what we had for our Redis instance. So I'll go ahead and add what we have here. And once I have those, then I'm simply going to go back to our dashboard, to our web server. So I actually need the Redis instance URL, which we have here. When I go back to render, I'll access our worker, which is basically the web service for running our we've actually gone away from that, but I guess I have to recreate it. So to create a worker, all we need to do is to just go ahead and create a new worker, and that will lead us to this page. We shall connect our code just like you see right here. Once our code has been connected, we shall basically set up the details. Here, all I'll do is to just go ahead and give this a name. So I made a mistake of simply going back without saving. So here, this is going to be bookly Celery worker. And then we have to point it to the language, which is Python, the branch, which is main. And our command in this case is going to be the one to run Celery. We're going to run it in our root directory, which is going to be our root directory. We're going to install our requirements, and then the start command will be the command to run our Celery worker. So if you go back right here, our command is going to be still this command that I copied here. If I copy this command, I'm going to go ahead and paste it right here. And once I paste it in here, it's going to be Celery. Then we shall point to the app and then the log level. Once that is done, I'll select the starter instance or the starter instance type. And once that is done, then I'll add all our environment variables. So I'll go ahead and paste them from the .env right here. I'll make some adjustments. So I'm going to begin by modifying this so that we only have the Redis URL. Now this Redis URL is one I'm going to get from render. So I'm going to paste in this and add environment variables. So I need to go ahead and get the value for this. I'll head back to our dashboard. And on our dashboard, I'll get the Redis URL which we set up. Let's head over back to Redis, and then inside here, all I need to get is this URL. So I'll go back where we set it up, and then I'll paste in the Redis URL. Once that is done, then the next thing is going to be for us to deploy our background worker. So this is something that has cost me money. They cost $7 per month. So our worker is going to start, and once it's done deploying, then Celery is going to go ahead and perform any tasks that we've sent to the queue, including that one task of sending our email. For as long as it has access to Redis, then it will look into the queue, get the message or get the task, and then basically execute that task and store the result. So the background work has been deployed, but I have a problem. So it's basically pointing to the default URL, which is on localhost. So this error, I think, is coming from the environment variables. I may have done a mistake. Instead of calling this the Redis URL, I called it the Redis URL. So I need to go ahead and reset this to Redis URL. And when I save, our server will redeploy and update the environment variable, therefore making the Celery worker active. So let's wait for that. So for now, our server has actually run. Our background task has run. We've successfully deployed our Celery worker. So to test whether our emails are being sent, what I'm going to do is to go ahead and send some more emails. If I execute this sending of emails and we get a response, we are going to now see that our emails have been sent. So to confirm whether our emails have been sent, I'll log into my email. So I'll go ahead and go to my email address. I don't think that's the right one, but what I'll do is to head over to my email address, and inside here, if our emails have been sent, then our Celery worker is going to be running successfully. So when I check right here, I'm seeing that our application is now sending emails, which is actually interesting. So our background task is working, or our Celery worker is running. So what I need to do is to go back here and try to maybe create a user account. So I'm going to head over to the endpoint for creating a user account, and then I'll try it out. So I'll begin by providing the first name. So I'll provide my first name as Sally, and then my last name as Jonathan. And then in here, I'll provide the username. So I'll provide the username as JOD35 and then my email. So the email I'll give is the email that we sent to the email initially. And then when you provide our password, I'll give in a password test123, and then I'll go ahead and submit. So when I execute this, let's check for the response. We now see something went wrong. So the beauty is we can still go ahead and see the logs on the server. So when you head over back to the dashboard, we shall basically check out our API. And in our API, if we go to our logs, we can know what exactly went wrong. So we now see no backends available, recommend you install one. So we actually have a problem that utils for setting our passwords are not working, and I think we just ran into the problem of a missing requirement somewhere. So I guess I have to look into what's missing. So after debugging, I realized that I have an error, and that error is coming from generate password hash inside our auth service. So it seems like the package for hashing those passwords is missing. So let's go ahead and look into that. So I'm seeing that we have the generate password hash function that's bringing that error to us, and then we have so I think this is coming from the utils for hashing our passwords. Let me check the requirements.txt file to make sure that we have our requirements set. So we have our passlib, but then we don't have bcrypt. So it's looking for bcrypt, but it can't find it. Now what I'll do is to go within my terminal and say pip install bcrypt. So I happened to modify the requirements.txt file, but then I removed some of the requirements. So if I go ahead and add everything, I think it will go ahead and work. So I'll say pip freeze, and then I'll point to requirements.txt, or what I'm going to do for my case is to remove this requirements.txt file. And once I've removed it, I'm going to now go ahead and pip freeze. So this needs to be done to our requirements.txt. So let me make this the right spelling, and when I freeze, we now have everything that we need inside here. So this is going to be our long requirements.txt. I'm going to go ahead and add it, commit it, and then our server will be deployed again. So you make sure that you have all your requirements set in your requirements.txt if you do not want to reach into such issues. So I'll say git commit, and when I push, this is supposed to redeploy the server. So when you go back to our events right here, our server is going to redeploy, and then we shall be able to see the application. So we shall try creating a user again. So you expect to land into these errors, but you need to be sure that you have all requirements in your requirements.txt file, and you need to make sure that your environment's variables are also set in the right way so that you do not land into such issues. Alright, so the server has been deployed successfully, and now let's try to test it again. So when I go back right here, I'll try to create a user account with this specific email. So if I execute, so we now see that our account has been created successfully. So I'm going to check our email to see if the email has been sent. So we are lucky our email has been sent. Now there's one issue. I have not yet set up the domain, and therefore this user account is not going to be verified. So it will redirect to localhost, which is not working. So what I need to do is to go ahead and set up the domain. I'll update that by going to the server's environment variables, and I'll replace it with this domain that we have here. So I'll head over to domain, and then I'll replace localhost 8000 with the domain of our server. So I'll click save, and once I've clicked save, those changes should reflect so that we can be able to reload the server. All right, so right now the server is running. So let's try to verify our accounts again. So I'll try creating a new user account with new details. So right now I have first name, last name as Sally Jonathan, but let's say I'm going to change the username to Sally JK and then the email to another email address. So this is going to be one for Sally Jonathan K at gmail.com. I provide my test password, and when I execute, our user account is going to be created successfully. So we need to go ahead and verify our email. So I head over to that email address. And when you head over back here, I will use the link that's provided in the email address to redirect us back to the app. So we now see that it's working on our remote URL or our deployed API. So once that is done, we can now try to test other endpoints. So if you go to our app here, we have been able to create our user account. So if I try to log in with one of the users we've created here, so I'm going to log in with Sally Jonathan. I'll go to our authentication endpoints and then I'll go to login. So now login endpoint, I'll create the email, so our email. So all this can still be documented, just like we saw in our documented part of the series. So I can provide the email, and then I provide the password, which is password test123. So if I execute, shall get both our access and refresh token. So what I'll do is to go ahead and provide this in our authorization. So when I click the authorization button, I'll provide our access token, click authorize, and then I'll do the same thing for the refresh token. So I'm going to copy it right here, and then I will paste it in here, and that is going to be enough for us to have access to all our endpoints. Now let us try to get some books. If we get all books or get the list of books, we now see that we have an empty list of books, which is working fine. We can also be able to create a book. So if I try to add a book here, once this is done, I can go ahead and execute. I will now see that our book has been created successfully. So when you try to retrieve our books, we'll execute and now see that our book has been returned successfully. So you can go ahead and test the rest of the endpoints, and now we have our application fully working in production. In this video, we've gone ahead and looked at how we can deploy FastAPI, PostgreSQL, Celery, and Redis in a production app. We've been able to do that by using a platform as a service tool called render.com. We've looked into how we can set up our web service, which is our FastAPI app. We've looked at how we can set up Redis, we can set up PostgreSQL, and we've looked at various aspects that are involved in deployment. If you've liked this video, please leave a like. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel. I am going to be creating videos on other ways to deploy our API. And yeah, hope to see you in the next video. Bye.